There are few buildings with such a peculiar story as the little brick structure dubbed John Brown's Fort. Before the events which would bestow the building its famed name, it was constructed in 1848 as the fire engine house for the Federal Army and Arsenal, whose structures once hugged the Potomac and Shenandoah rivers in Harpers Ferry. The structure doubled as a guardhouse, as it was one of the closest structures to the southern gates to the armory. It was this proximity to the gates that primed it to be the stage for one of the inciting incidents of the American Civil War. On the night of October 16, 1859, abolitionist John Brown and a small party of like-minded individuals ascended upon Harper's Ferry to procure firearms from the federal arsenal, hoping to trigger and arm a slave revolt in the surrounding area and begin his vision of a holy war against slavery. After taking control of the arsenal and armory, Brown's team seized the engine house as a command post. As the raid progressed, prisoners were taken from the town's key figures and held within the brick structure. When the militias arrived, Brown's surviving raiders fell back and locked themselves within the engine house. Brown refused to surrender on multiple occasions, leading to Marines under the command of Robert E. Lee to break through the doors with a combination of a sledgehammer and ladder. Brief hand-to-hand combat ensued as the Marines traversed the breach, leading to the death of one Marine and several of the raiders within the walls of the engine house. For its part in John Brown's raid, it became a symbol to both sides during the American Civil War. To the Union, it brought out admiration. To the Confederacy, it riled up hatred. Harper's Ferry exchanged hands multiple times during the conflict, with much of the army and arsenal being burned in April of '61. The engine house was the only structure from these facilities to survive the war. It served as a prison, a powder magazine, and may at one time even been a storeroom for the quartermaster. By the end of the conflict, however, it was in a state of disrepair. Soldiers had pried wood and brick away to take home as souvenirs. Sometime prior to the turn of the century, someone painted John Brown's fort over the doorways which the Marines had charged through. In 1891, entrepreneurs purchased the structure with the ambitious plan to display it at the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago. This required for the whole building to be disassembled brick by brick and shipped from West Virginia to Illinois. But when it opened for display in 1893, it attracted just 11 visitors in 10 days. Most likely, few wanted to be reminded of the deadliest American conflict, which was still fresh in many minds. The fair closed it, dismantled, and left the bricks to sit in a vacant lot. Enter Kate Field, famed journalist who had quite the passionate interest in the history of John Brown. In 1870, she had purchased what is now the John Brown Farm State Historic Site in New York. Hearing of the situation the engine house was in, Field launched a campaign to bring it back to Harper's Ferry. In 1895, she managed to secure the funds to purchase the bricks and secure transportation by the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad free of charge. Unfortunately, by this time, the original site of the engine house was now covered over by a railroad embankment. She found an alternative, however, in the form of 5 acres of property on the farm of Alexander Murphy on a hill overlooking the valley 3 miles from town. Murphy sold the lot for a symbolic $1. This was not the only arsenal-related relic the Murphy farm possessed. The iron gates of the armory had also been purchased some years earlier for use on the farm. They are now on display at the John Brown Museum in the National Park. Although back in the Harpers Ferry area, it was still hardly a tool for educational purposes. Attempts to establish a road and law to draw and facilitate visitation never developed beyond the planning table. It became used as a storage area by the Murphy family for their farming needs. But back in Harper's Ferry, a new entity was interested in preserving the engine house. Storer College, a predominantly black school, had been operating out of Harper's Ferry since shortly after the end of the Civil War. It had become one of the leading schools for black Americans, standing in opposition to the rise of Jim Crow laws. Many who were faculty and students of the school wished to preserve the engine house for its significance in John Brown's war against slavery. Many made pilgrimages out to the Murphy farm, most famously on what was dubbed John Brown Day on August 17, 1906. In 1909, after several years of fundraising, the engine house was moved from the Murphy farm to the campus on Camp Hill, now standing less than a mile from its original position. The team reconstructing the building used a series of period photographs, but did not realize until later that the photographs were in fact reversed due to the wet plate process, meaning they rebuilt the structure in reverse as well. A pamphlet later released to visitors acknowledged the inaccuracies. Nevertheless, it was a popular attraction for both students and tourists alike. The college housed a collection of school-related relics within the engine house, while students were encouraged to volunteer as tour guides to better their public speaking skills. Storer College seemed to be the final permanent home for the engine house until 1955, when the college was forced to close due to financial issues and the legal end of segregation in schools. Harpers Ferry National Historic Site started out as an idea to be made a national monument honoring John Brown as raiders, but opposition and conflict over what should and shouldn't be interpreted led to the national park to scrap the idea of mentioning the raid outright. But by 1960, the civil rights movement was starting to make headway, and so too did the Park Service in opening up its interpretations. The Park Service wished to acquire the engine house and bring it down into the historic district, as close as possible to its original location. This was met with opposition from alumni of Storer College as well as the local black community, who were uneasy about how the Park Service would interpret the building. After much delay and dispute, the Park Service made preparations to make the move from Camp Hill into the center of town. This move would be done by keeping the structure intact as Storer College had preserved it, including keeping markers built within the walls by the school. Its 1968 move is where it currently rests as of October 2021, 150 feet away from its original location that is now marked by a granite obelisk dedicated to the fort.